This is South Dakota. Here you'll find the Wind Cave herd made up of 250 to 400 free-roaming, legendary North American animals, bison. It's one of only 7 herds in the U.S. where the animals roam freely, and these bison have very little domestic cattle genes. That's crucial for preserving a species that was nearly wiped out by humans, and everything was great for them here. They were completely safe, multiplying and carrying on their struggling lineage. But in 2009, 23 of them had to head way down south to the northern desert lands of Mexico. Why? As dramatic as it sounds, to fix humanity's mistakes. Now, let's see what people did wrong and why bison had to step in. By the late 19th century, the North American prairies were alive with massive bison herds, around 60 million strong. But by the mid-1800s, profit-driven hunting for pelts, slaughterhouses, and local policies caused a disastrous crash. By 1870, numbers fell to around 5.5 million, and by 1880, just 400,000 were left. So in just 80 years, their numbers plummeted from 60 million to 395,000. It was a total disaster, and unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. The continued pressure on the indigenous people who relied on bison and the ongoing commercial hunting, partly controlled by the government to weaken the tribes, drove the bison population to a record low by 1889, with only 541 individuals left. And by the early 20th century, just about 300 bison roamed freely in the U.S., found only in a few reserves and protected areas. But bison didn't just live in what's now the United States. These legendary giants also roamed the northern parts of modern-day Mexico. Was the situation any different from the U.S.? No, bison were hunted down just the same. In colonial and post-colonial Mexico, bison became prey killed for food and trade. Their meat, hides, and even tongues, which were considered a delicacy and material for crafts. This is reflected in numerous travel chronicles where regular hunts in the southern Great Plains around modern-day Chihuahua are mentioned, often organized by expeditions as early as the 16th and 17th centuries. By the 19th century, hunting had turned into a full-blown industry. Newspaper reports from the 1820s to the 1860s describe large-scale roundups of herds on the plains and subsequent mass slaughter. The ciboleros played a major role here. Those were the descendants of Spanish colonists and those who had mastered the trade in New Spain. They hunted bison for hides and meat, pushing further south as settlements expanded. By 1870, their hunting faced almost no resistance from the animals. The population had been virtually wiped out. By the end of the 19th century, there were no more free bison herds left in northern Mexico. Human impact had turned into a disaster here too, and so ended the golden age of the prairie engineers, ushering in an era of lifeless pastures where millions of animals had once thundered across the land. The situation was complicated by the fragmentation of land plots after the agrarian reforms of the 20th century, which broke up the prairies, the once native habitat of bison. Small ranches and fields appeared. However, cattle farming turned out to be unprofitable, so people started irrigating the land. You could say this was an outright destruction of the territories where bison once lived, so there wasn't even a hope of any kind of return. And at one point, Mexicans in the northern states began to notice that in the absence of bison, the local landscape started changing. Vast areas, instead of grasslands, were turning into something like this: thickets of invasive shrubs. Besides, soil erosion in the prairies of northern Mexico got much worse. The dense intersoil crust trapped water on the surface while heavy rains washed away the thin, fertile layer of soil. Because of this, the soil layer lost about 0.2 to 0.4 inches every year, which over decades reduced pasture productivity and made their degradation even worse. Of course, biodiversity suffered as well. Besides losing a ton of plants typical of the prairies, black-tailed prairie dog populations started to wither even more. They were already facing massive persecution from humans, and the disappearance of the bison finished off the little creatures. To give you a better idea, here's an example. In 1988, a complex of colonies of these small critters was found in northern Mexico, covering 136,000 acres. According to research, due to combined negative effects, including the long absence of bison, the area shrank by 73% in just a couple of decades. And the density of prairie dogs dropped from an average of 25 per 2.5 acres in 1988 to just 2 per 2.5 acres in 2004. Along with the prairie dogs, several species of ground animals and birds started disappearing too. And that's exactly when those bison from South Dakota we mentioned at the very beginning came in handy. In 2009, 23 giants arrived at the Janos Biosphere Reserve, located in the far north of Mexico's Chihuahua state, right where the land had been degrading for years in every way due to the extermination of bison and other negative impacts from humans. Bison were released back into the wild, into areas they once roamed in huge numbers. But the reintroduction in northern Mexico didn't stop at just 23 animals. Between 2009 and 2018, with help from the U.S., the herd in the park grew to over 200. Everyone was focused on keeping the Mexican bison population growing. Why? Because their return really helps heal lands damaged by human activity. First things first, they walk. A lot. On their massive legs, bison can cover up to 1.8 miles a day searching for food, and the whole time they're actually helping the ground they walk on. Now you might argue, what about cows? Why is it so bad when they trample around, but good when bison do it? Well, the legendary beasts of the prairie have an answer. Cows are animals that have gotten used to living without any danger, and hundreds of years of grazing have made them move in a sluggish, lazy way. As a result, they over-trample the land, turning it into something you'd rather run from than save. Bison are wild animals, always on the lookout for food, so they hardly ever stay in one place. They keep moving. This means they don't trample the same spot too much. As a result, a bison herd's movement only breaks up the biological soil crust and breaks down compacted clumps. When it rains, water soaks into the ground instead of running off, increasing precipitation infiltration. It also reduces surface runoff and lessens the erosive impact of heavy rains. That's exactly why the prairies in northern Mexico have degraded in many places into a water-impermeable crust. Cows trampled there, but bison didn't. That's why the return of these legendary giants helps restore them. Water is life for plants. In many parts of northern Mexico, it wasn't available in normal amounts because it was flowing to the wrong places. However, after bison showed up, the soil structure changed, meaning the right conditions for plant life appeared. On top of that, bison, well, they produce manure. You could say we're looking at literal factories of excrement. An adult bison can generate between 50 and 59 pounds of manure a day on average. Well, it doesn't sound very nice, but the prairie plants are thrilled. Bison only eat natural grass, so their dung is packed with nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other goodies any farmer would love to toss on their field. This is basically fertilizer that doesn't even need spreading. The bison roaming vast areas take care of distributing the results of their digestion on a massive scale. And here's where Colorado comes in. They did a study there, took soil samples from places where bison grazed and compared them with samples from spots untouched by these mammals. Turns out the concentration of available nitrogen in the soil was 40% higher in areas with bison. So bison boost grass growth and speed up nutrient cycling. Combined with the increase in water reaching the soil, it turns out that plants in degraded areas with bison recover much better. For example, according to another 30-year-long study, researchers concluded bison double plant biodiversity in the prairies. That said, there's another way bison impact their environment. They roll around. Mostly they do this because insects keep biting them. Plus, biologists have concluded that the animals are trying to cool themselves down this way. And some even say it's a quirky form of play, a way to strengthen group bonds, or even a show of dominance during mating season. But what matters to us now is that by rolling around, bison can help plants colonize even areas that have been completely wrecked by negative impacts. Look, while the bison is racking up miles across the prairies, it can easily pick up all sorts of seeds on its skin and fur. Then it arrives on degraded land and starts rolling around. During this process, the land gets cleared of all weeds and other plants that can take over even the least suitable soil. Meanwhile, the bison drops the very seeds it picked up on its journey. For them, the spot where the animal rolled around is perfect for starting to grow since there's no competition. At the same time, the depressions created by bison can hold water even in the most degraded soil, meaning plants get the key resource they need to grow. And as a bonus, a bison might drop some fertilizer somewhere, supplying plants with nutrients. Basically, bison know a thing or two about greening up the landscape and expanding green cover. By the way, it doesn't stop at the grass spreading, because small water-filled pits and plants are like tiny wetlands, and they're really loved by all sorts of creatures, like insects or amphibians that eat insects. And then other animals might come or fly in. Basically, the bison just lives its life and everything around it changes. It's also worth noting that invasive shrubs, which turn prairies into something other than prairies, are destroyed by bison not just because they roll around, but because they eat them. which is perfect for restoring degraded prairies to what they were before bison disappeared. Basically, the bison is a creature capable of restoring even a severely degraded landscape, exactly like the one in northern Mexico, in Janos Nature Reserve. And Mexicans totally get that, which is why they aren't stopping even after the bison population has gone over 200. Reintroduction efforts are still in full swing. Meanwhile, Mexico is also betting on bison to also help bring back other key prairie animals, prairie dogs. Yep, those little rodents we discussed earlier today. Look, bison keep the prairie patchy, have eaten grass in certain places where the vegetation cover has become short. Meanwhile, nearby areas remain untouched, or the bison haven't been there in a while so the grass stays tall. This turns huge areas into what's called mosaic pastures. These, in turn, support way more biodiversity than areas with just short or just tall grass. Some species thrive in short grass, while others do best in long grass. And they all live side by side, taking advantage of the grass at a certain height. Prairie dogs are the ones who love short grass. They can only live normally under such conditions because tall plants are an obstacle that blocks their view of predators. Yes, people have hunted prairie dogs, plus they have plenty of other enemies. However, the disappearance of bison and the subsequent decline of their ideal short grass habitats is also a major reason for their population drop. Why are they so important? For starters, prairie dogs dig a lot of burrows. They have entire underground cities all connected where these little guys live, and it's not just a great way to hide from predators, it also helps aerate the soil and retain moisture. So after the bison, prairie dogs make the prairies even more fertile. Active digging also affects the nutrient cycle in the soil. Stirring up the soil speeds up the breakdown of organic matter and releases nutrients. Plus, just like with bison, prairie dog waste enriches the soil with nitrogen and other elements. This can boost local fertility and plant productivity. It's logical to assume that prairie dogs also need to eat to produce waste, and here, just like bison, they're perfect for keeping the prairies healthy. They eat grass, so the vegetation around their burrows stays short. Plus, studies show that prairie dogs are enemies of invasive shrubs. The little rodents attack young pest plants before they can grow, stopping them from spreading further. Another interesting fact, prairie dogs are crucial for other really important prairie species. Take the black-footed ferret, for example. By the way, it's the only ferret species native to North America. It's a predator, so its diet consists of animals. Well, one animal actually, those very same prairie dogs. In a year, one ferret family can go through about 250 of these little rodents, and if we're talking about their overall diet, it's 90% prairie dogs. Moreover, ferrets don't dig their own burrows. They take over existing prairie dog homes for shelter, sleep, and raising their young. It's a total dependency, and they need healthy, large colonies of these little rodents. No prairie dogs means no ferrets, period. Because of the extermination of bison and prairie dogs, by 1967, the black-footed ferret was listed as an endangered species in North America's Red Book, and until 1981, it was even believed to be completely extinct until a small population was discovered in Wyoming, proving that the animals were still alive, but their numbers were critically low compared to the days before humans started heavily impacting North America's prairies. Right now, there are so many breeding programs happening in the U.S., and in 2020, they even cloned a black-footed ferret using 30-year-old genetic material. But everyone knows that without prairie dogs, there won't be any ferrets. So restoring the prairies with bison in the Janos Reserve is also a chance for these little predators. Besides, another creature depends on prairie dogs. Let's just say a very unusual one. The owl. The burrowing owl. And yes, scientists didn't name the bird that way for nothing. It's more tied to the ground than to trees. However, the owl prefers not to dig its own burrows, but to use the homes of those very prairie dogs. That's already enough to say no prairie dogs means no owls. But besides that, the bird's diet also consists of prairie dogs. Scientists also found that prairie dog colonies create the perfect hunting environment for burrowing owls. The prairie dogs constantly keep the vegetation low around their burrows, giving the owls a clear view and easy access to prey, including insects, small rodents, lizards, and frogs. Finally, burrowing owls have perfectly adapted to the fact that prairie dogs are quite the negotiators, with one of the most advanced vocal communication systems around. The owls just decided let the prairie dog's work as an alarm system. The bird hears the little rodents panicking and realizes it's time to fly away because something dangerous is coming. So these birds' lives are tightly tied to prairie dogs. A decline in the rodents leads to the same decline in the burrowing owl population. What's the bottom line? Bison are huge grazing animals that maintain the prairies. They matter a lot to the smaller but clever rodents, prairie dogs. And in turn, these creatures are vital for ferrets and owls, plus a bunch of other species we didn't even mention today. No bison, no life for countless other animals. One by one, nearly every species could disappear, but reintroducing these legendary creatures is a chance to fix past mistakes and bring the entire chain of animals back to the prairies. So ecologists and everyone working to return bison to northern Mexico are definitely on the right track. There's no other way to fully bring back North America's most legendary territories.